We have been talking the last couple of weeks about the power of decisions, especially pre-decisions, all those that we can make well ahead of time uh, in order to be better prepared for those situations that arise. And we realize we can't make every decision ahead of time. There's just no way to plan it all out and have everything go perfect so that you know everything in advance. But we talked about basic principles and uh, guidelines that we can establish that then, as those other decisions, more specific decisions come up, we can begin to be better prepared to make those. And so last week we talked about doing that in order to be ready. Whenever Satan comes up against us and begins to challenge us, we can be ready because we have this basis of how our decisions are going to be made already in place. This morning, as we talk about pre-decisions or the power within them, we're going to be talking about the subject of consistency. And this is probably one of the most important spiritual qualities, in a sense, that we can have is consistency. And yet it's probably one that we all struggle with from time to time, in that it gets difficult in today's world to just really find the consistency. So many things pulling at us, so many things trying to take us in every direction. And it just, we struggle to ever get into a rhythm. And yet, when I pause and I think about it, that seems to only be true about spiritual things. Got a couple of television shows that come on a regular basis. We do a pretty good job of making time to see those shows when they're on, don't we? DVR helped me a lot with that. I can now DVR and watch it when I'm ready. But I've lost that part of consistency in my life. But our consistency really is the key to our spiritual strength. If I'm going to have any kind of spiritual strength, there's got to be some consistency to the spiritual exercise that I put in. Uh, one of the reasons that I can't seem to shake the weight that I keep putting on, and every time I go to the scale, there's another 5 pounds there, is there's no consistency to my workout program, unless it's that it consistently doesn't exist. Uh, Spiritually, we're the same way. We have to develop a consistency, and it affects our spiritual strength. It affects our ministries. It affects our physical health, our relationships, our financial goals. Consistency is the key to all of it. We have the greatest of intentions. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to read the Bible more. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to be on time. And yet, we struggle. It reminds me a little bit of Paul, Romans chapter 7, beginning with verse 15. Paul says, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do it. But what I hate to do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. Excuse me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good that I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Can you relate to Paul? I can relate to Paul. I have the best of intentions. It's sort of Jesus in the garden with his disciples. The spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. One is trying, the other is going its own way. And Paul says, far too often the flesh is winning. The desires of the world are winning out in what I do. And so we understand what he's trying to say there is we know what to do, we want to do it. When the end of the day comes, Lord, I need some more forgiveness because I messed up again today. And so the pre-decisions that we've been talking about are what's going to help us with our consistency. Because they are made away from that heat of the moment, because they are setting principles that guide the rest of our time and help us to be ready for the moment. And when I'm ready, I can be consistent. It's those moments when I allow myself to be caught off guard. That's when I struggle the most. I've shared before, I picked up a real bad habit of language that I shouldn't use. It's a hard habit to get rid of. In fact, it's a little bit like they say with being an alcoholic. You don't get rid of it. You just have to figure out, how am I going to control it? And, excuse me, throat is itching this morning big time. I realized one day that I could control it. When I was around mom and dad, when I was around family members, when I was around church members, I didn't use that language. When I got out around my buddies and I got out around the people I worked with and everywhere else, I wasn't trying to stop it. I just let it flow. I was like everybody else. And I realized, because I knew, like Paul, I know I don't need to be talking like this. I realized I can control this. I control it when I want to. And so making that pre-decision helps me realize I've got to be on guard. I've got to be ready with this decision. I'm not going to use that language. For the most part, I do pretty good today. For the most part. There are still those moments where something catches me off guard or where I allow what's going on to so overtake my thought process that I don't choose my words carefully. And I have to take that up with God each time. Excuse me. But again, that's what our making these decisions. I don't want to talk like that. And so I'm going to be ready and prepared the best I can for these situations to eliminate that. The people that we see who are the most successful at something are generally the people who are the most consistent in their approach to it. There will be individuals who make the occasional splash. They get lucky. They find the quick fix. But the reality is those get lucky quick fixes usually are short-lived. They're a Band-Aid on the problem. They don't fix the problem. And a lot of times those end up worse off than when they started because they never develop the consistency that sees them through all of the moments. The reality is, I become that which I do repeatedly. You pause and look at the events of your life, the things that you do on a regular basis, those are the things that begin to define who you are. What other people see you doing, how people see you talking, how they see you acting, because of the things that you do repetitively. So if I want to become healthier, I've got to do healthy things more consistently. If I want to be smarter, I've got to study more consistently. If I want to be a better Christian, I must what? I must do the things a Christian does more consistently. We see the story of Daniel in the book of Daniel. Most of us know it. We're not going to dive into this in depth this morning. Daniel and several others were taken into captivity around 605 BC, and they were trained in the way of the Babylonians. They were recognized for being smarter than a lot of the others of their age, better looking than a lot of the others of their age. They had all of the characteristics that the world looked at and said, these can be influential people. And so they took them and they began to train them as they would the Babylonian youths, so that they were ingrained in that. It became ingrained in them, so they could be future leaders and uh, do things for them. Daniel had a consistency about his life. Despite being a captive, he was consistent in what he ate. You remember the very first story we read of Daniel? The king's got all this food laid out before him. He tells him, this is what you're going to eat. Daniel said, I can't defile myself before God with that food. It's been offered to idols. It's had this done. Just give me some vegetables. They finally gave in to him, and God blessed him. He was better off on just those vegetables than what all the others were on the king's food. He was consistent in how he prayed. Scripture tells us he prayed 3 times a day. As a result, Daniel stood out because of the consistency of the things in his life. He rose through the ranks until King Darius was going to put him in charge of all the others. He second to the king. And as you can imagine, the others didn't like him. So Daniel chapter 6 and verse 4, at this the administrators, the satraps, tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. They went around, what's the gossip on Daniel? What's the dirt? What can you find? What can you dig up? What can you make up? What can we throw against the wall and see if it sticks? They couldn't find anything. But in the process, they noticed his consistency. Daniel's going to pray 3 times a day. So what do? They got a law put into place. For 30 days, you can't pray to anybody except the king. What did Daniel do? Daniel kept praying. Verse 10 of chapter 6, when he learned the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. And the punishment for it was thrown in the lion's den. We drop down to verse 23 of chapter 6. Daniel's been thrown into the lion's den, even though the king really didn't want to have to do it. He realized he'd been tricked. Verse 23, the king was overjoyed, gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den because he was still alive. When Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted God. The trust didn't develop in the lion's den. If Daniel had waited till the moment of trial, he would not have been ready. There would have been no consistency to his spirituality, no consistency in his relationship with God if he'd have waited for the moment. But Daniel was prepared for the lion's den. He had consistently developed his relationship with God. He had consistently worshiped God, had consistently put his faith and his trust in God and seen it rewarded time and time again. There is a difference between occasional prayer and consistent prayer. And it makes all the difference in our spiritual lives. So, how do we grow in our consistency? We'll talk about 3 things as we tie all this together this morning. To grow our consistency, we start with the why. As odd as it sounds, we plan to fail. And the third, we fall in love with the process. Start with the why. We need to understand why we're doing something. We need to understand what it's all about because that's what gives us the motivation. I know I need to serve God. Why do I need to serve God other than the fact He's going to judge me one day and all of that? Well, I need to serve God because it brings me closer to God. And if it brings me closer to God, it brings me closer to His protection. It brings me closer to His blessings. I want a better marriage. I want to honor my vows. Why? So I have that better marriage, so that I raise together with my spouse godly kids, so that we can develop a family legacy that is a consistent legacy of a God-fearing, God-honoring family. Financial stability. It's not about just getting a paycheck. It's about being worry-free. It's about being able to be generous. That's why I need to worry about financial stability. So I can do the things that help honor the vows of my marriage, that help raise my kids in the right way, that help me to serve God better. Not talking about willpower, but why power. How many of you heard growing up, or maybe even as a parent said to your child, do it because I said so? I heard that a lot. How many times did you get the explanation of why they said so? Or did you give the explanation of why you said so? I've asked people that before, and I've got responses back like, I'm the parent, I don't have to explain why. Okay. There's a certain level of accuracy of that statement. That you want better results, not necessarily every time or not necessarily right into that exact moment, but start explaining whys. I don't want you spending as much time with that child, and this is why. And if this changes, then how much time you spend with them can change. I don't want you, whatever it is. And the same, we have been guilty of this as churches, as preachers, as Bible class teachers, and other things. We throw these things out and we say, this is the facts according to the Bible. And we don't take time to explain, well, why would God say that? Why would God set it up that way? Why? It's okay to ask why. It's okay to want to understand deeper because that's what's going to help us develop the consistency. I need to lose weight because there's several whys I could put in there why I need to lose some weight. But if I don't understand those whys, what's the likelihood of me losing weight? I'm not serious about it if I don't understand the whys. If I don't understand the effects. The same is true for us spiritually speaking. I said, secondly, we need to plan to fail. And this is the one, sounds like it counteracts everything that we ever say we want to do. Daniel prayed 3 times a day. You think he ever missed a time? I think he probably did. Got held up, wasn't there at the prayer hour, be able to say his prayer. Maybe he overslept one morning because it worked really late the night before. Wasn't up to say his prayer breakfast. We've got to realize there are going to be those moments when life hits us. And we may fail at what we're trying to be consistent about. What I'm saying with this plan to fail is understanding consistency is not about perfection. Consistency is not about doing it every single time. Consistency is about when I make a mistake or when I miss a moment, I don't throw it out. I pick up and I go on. How many of you ever started a Bible reading plan? I've started a bunch of times in my life. How many of you have ever finished a Bible reading plan? We've got one good one. Did you miss some along the way and have to play some makeups? Okay. See, I start off doing really good and then I get behind, scrap it. I'll start that again some other time, or I get out of it. I go to studying other stuff or whatever. I don't finish the plan because I got behind. Trying to develop the habits that are our new spiritual strengths, our consistency and something. There's going to be moments. I just need a plan knowing I'm going to fail. It's not that I'm planning to fail, it's that I plan knowing I'm going to. And I'm pre-deciding Just because I have a moment of failure doesn't mean that I'm a failure. Just because I have a moment of failure doesn't mean that I'm going to quit and give up trying to make this change in my life or to add this strength to my life. It just means I pick up and I go on. We do the same thing sometimes with medicine, don't we? You take this for 5 days, day 3, I forget about it. Well, do I just stop there and not take any more of it? Sometimes. But most of the time, it's now a 6-day plan. I missed day 3, so now I got day 4, 5, and now 6. So I got that extra pill. Doesn't work quite as good, but I'm getting some benefit out of it. It's getting me closer to the goal of being where I wanted to be. Our goal is to be consistent. Our goal is to get to where we're not making mistakes. But when we're starting out, they're going to happen. Just plan on the fact that they're going to be there and move on. And then lastly, we said we got to fall in love with the process. Daniel wasn't about promotions. He didn't eat that way because he wanted a promotion. He didn't pray that way because he wanted the promotion. He didn't do it because he wanted other people to recognize and see what he was doing and say, well, look how religious, how spiritual, how great he is. He did it because he loved God. And he did it because he learned to love what it took to worship God, to love God. He learned to love doing the things that counted. And that's us. We don't always like to get up on a Sunday morning and come to worship. Uh, it's not always what I want to do on a Sunday morning. I'm tired. I wasn't a good guy. I stayed up too late the night before. But I get up and I come because I love getting to God, of getting what comes from being here and worshiping God. I can't sing worth a flip, but I love to sing. I love to hear the prayers. I love sharing the word. Love hearing those kids in there. I've had a lot of times where I didn't feel like going to church, but I knew if I just got myself there, when I left, I was going to feel better. And God's never failed me in that. It's learning to love doing the things that count. I saw one of my few moments on Facebook this week. Parent talking about their child was dealing with a lot of bullying at school and shared her solution. It was called the kind jar. Some of you may have saw it floating all around Facebook. She started talking about her to her daughter about why was she dreading school? Why was she not wanting to go? And it came out kids that were her friends now had new friends and they didn't treat her the same and other kids were picking and all of this. And so the mom brought out the kind jar. And they put a list of all the students that her daughter went to school with in that jar. Every morning she had to pull a name out of the jar. During the course of that day, she had to make an effort to go out of her way to do something nice and kind to that person all day long. Not expecting anything in return, not asking for anything back, just, you're the name that I drew today. I've got to be especially nice to you. Does that sound like fun? Some maybe, some yeah. Probably be a little difficult to start with, especially if it's one of the ones that's really been bullied. The little girl found it a little difficult to begin with, but she began to learn to love the process of figuring out, what am I going to do to be nice to this person? How are they going to react when I do this? And she learned to love being kind. And by the time the end of the school year was around, it had changed how everybody else reacted to her. How do we live as Christians? Do we love the process of life as a Christian? That means when somebody else is not so nice, when somebody else is, even at our age, bullying us about our Christianity, do I still look for ways to be nice? Do I still look for ways to worship God, to honor God, to serve Him in all these different areas of life so that I can develop this consistency? Because my walk with God needs consistency. You ever go on a walk with somebody that doesn't walk the same speed as you do? It's a struggle, isn't it? It's without conscious effort to control your pace to theirs, whether you're the faster person or the slower person. Without the the effort to match the pace of the other person, it's hard to carry on a conversation. It's hard to do a lot of things that you might otherwise be trying to do as you walk along. You stop to look at something, you look up, and they're 100 yards down the trail. You got to catch up. You keep walking, and they're the ones that stop. We've got to learn to walk consistently with God, or we get left behind, or we miss out on, hey, wait a minute, God stopped to spend some time looking at this and being blessed by this. And I missed out on it because I kept walking and not realizing that God had stopped. We're going to continue our series next week. We said before service started, I get up and I say what I've got to say, and if that's short, that's short. If it's long, it's long. This morning, it's long. So we'll continue our thoughts next week as we go into our next phase of pre-deciding. I encourage you, make every decision that you can to follow God. Make every decision that you can to understand why to follow God. To understand why He tells us to turn the other cheek. To understand why He tells us to forgive. Why He tells us to love our enemies. and all those other things that go with it. Understand you're going to have some gaps along the way where you don't get it quite right. But the more consistent you get, the easier it becomes to fall in love with the process. The lesson's yours.